What is up, everybody? It's DFS Dudes back for another edition of the Deep Dive. Today is Thursday, September the 19th. A very short 4-game main slate, my type of slate. Unfortunately, there's not really too many good tournaments out there. $5.55 to win $5K, not a very big first place prize there. And then you've got an $18.88 tournament on FanDuel that has a big first place prize of $20,000. But I mean, outside of that, it's not. I mean, you want to take a couple of shots with some lineups. We'll give you some information. But the 1888, I mean, you're really losing to rake in that tournament. I mean, 6,305 total entries. They're paying out 1,451 of them. If you cash, you turn $18.88 into $30. I mean, that's not 2-to-1 on your money. So you kind of lose out to rake there. It's pretty heavy. 20,000 to first, 10 to second, 5 to third, 3 to fourth, and then I mean a top 10 finish gets you $500. So I mean it's a take a shot type tournament. It's not even close to being, in my opinion, a max enter type tournament. You're just going to lose the rake on that. Find something smaller. Take a couple of entries. Take the information on this video. Make some single entry lineups. Play them in the single entry contest. And that's kind of where tonight is, if you ask me. I mean, like I said, they're paying out 1,451 spots in the tournament. And just some simple math there. 6,305 spots. They're paying, is that even 20%? And then you don't even get to double your money. So not a big fan of that. Just get some entries, some smaller entries, single entry stuff. That's kind of where I'd keep it. So looking at the slate, 4 games: Toronto at Baltimore, Detroit at Cleveland, St. Louis at the Cubs, Kansas City is at Minnesota. So a 4-game slate. Last night, absolutely nailed it. I mean, absolutely nailed it. The Giants put up 11 runs. I really liked them. Another team that I really liked was the situation with the Blue Jays and the Orioles. I really liked Dylan Bundy, as a tournament play last night. The Blue Jays did score a bunch of runs, but Bundy, 5 innings, 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts. I mean, I'm not sure what else you could ask for at his price range. I really said that we needed to take a look at Seattle. Pittsburgh didn't do much. The Phillies, though, and Zach Eflin missed on that, and I was perfectly happy missing on Eflin. I just, I'm not going to load up Philadelphia pitching against teams that have left-handed bats. I'm just not going to do it. But the big story of the night was Lamont. I mean, kind of extensively talked about Lamont yesterday on the podcast. And Hauser was another piece that I said put him in the Dylan Bundy category. Limited to lower exposure rates, get some exposure to him. Hauser struck out 5 in 5 innings, gave up 2 earned runs. Decent outing for the $6,000 price tag that he had. But Lamont, on the other side of this, I mean, lights out performance. 6 innings, 14 strikeouts, gave up an earned run, got a win, 67 fantasy points on FanDuel. And in the tournaments I was in, he was in the 3 to 6% owned ownership level. I mean, nobody was on Lamont. And then lastly, Samardzija. I told you guys he's not going to get beat up. Samardzija's not a guy that goes out and just gets smashed in for 5 or 6 runs. He can give up 3 runs, he can give up 4 runs, but he's not going to get smashed in, and Bochy lets this guy eat innings. 6 innings, only struck out 2, gave up an earned run. 22, 23 fantasy points at a $6,000 price tag, almost 4x. Not much more you can ask for there. But Lamont was the guy that we really, really knocked it out of the park with. Tonight, I mean, look, you've got Clevenger, Flaherty, Hendricks, Gibson, Anthony Kay, Gabriel Yanoa, Mike Montgomery, and Daniel Norris. There's not a lot to like on this slate, and that's why I'm going to tell you to play some single entry tournaments. Really difficult from a pitching standpoint. People are going to load up Clevenger. They're going to think the pivot to Clevenger is Flaherty and save the money. Some people will have exposure to Hendricks. So let's talk about the other guys. Can you use Mike Montgomery against the Kansas City Royals? 31 games, 3 wins, 9 losses for Montgomery. A 4.7 ERA, 82 and a third innings pitched, and 101 hits against him. That's just not real good, man. You take a look at his last outing, and it was a decent outing. The problem is, for going 5 innings and only giving up 2 earned runs, he only got you 12 fantasy points. And at his price tag today of $6,000, that's only a 2x figure. I can't get behind that. There's no way I can get behind that. You'd have to go back to August the 10th. 7 innings, 12 strikeouts, 67 fantasy points out of nowhere against the Detroit Tigers. This is Minnesota. This is not Detroit. Gabriel Yanoa, he's 6,100, facing the Toronto Blue Jays, who will be really popular tonight going against Yanoa. 34 games, he's 1-8 with 2 quality starts. He's been mixed around as far as a reliever, an opener, a starter. They've used him everywhere. And he's like a 2 earned runs per appearance type guy. He's got some upside, but let's take a look at the best case scenario, which would be September 3rd against Tampa. 6 and a third, 2 strikeouts, 2 earned runs, 23 fantasy points. That's the best side. That's the best case scenario. That's the upside. 23 fantasy points. And it's not even close. I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, Samardzija yesterday was 6,000. You reckon Samardzija has way more upside than 2 strikeouts. He has way more upside than 23 fantasy points. And Samardzija doesn't get his teeth kicked in like this guy does, giving up 7 to the Yankees, giving up 7 to Tampa Bay, giving up 7 to Seattle, giving up 6 to Oakland. Samardzija didn't have that last night. You know it does. Can't get behind that. Anthony Kay will go for Baltimore. The primary pitcher is what they're calling it now. He'll be the primary pitcher. 2 games, 6 and a third, 10 strikeouts, and 10 innings pitched, and 11 hits given up. He went 5 2/3 against Tampa back on September the 7th. Struck out 8. He went 4 1/3 last week against the Yankees. 4 1/3, struck out 2, gave up 5 earned runs. Talk about Jekyll and Hyde. This would be the guy, right? This would be the guy. So, Anthony Kay for the Toronto Blue Jays pitching against Baltimore tonight against Gabriel Yanoa. And I guess the difference is between an opener and the primary pitcher. Maybe the primary pitcher, they're not giving away that this is a bullpen type game. Maybe the primary pitcher is we're going to let him go as far as he can. Maybe we have a pitch count on him. Maybe he goes 6. Maybe he goes 3 1/3. But he'll be the primary pitcher today. So if that's the case, look, there's some upside here. His upside is 8 strikeouts over 5 2/3, 35 fantasy points at 6,300. If you want to get creative, this would be the guy to get creative with. This would be the low-owned, dark horse type play. Can Anthony Kay go out there and give you 5, qualify for a win? Toronto puts up a ton of runs against Yanoa, just completely kicks his teeth in. And Anthony Kay's efficient. Goes 5 or 6 innings, strikes out 5 or 6 guys, limits the damage to 1 or 2 runs. So 6,300, he has the potential to get you a 5x figure. Kyle Gibson, I haven't been on the Kyle Gibson train all year. 30 starts, he's 13-7 with a 4.76 ERA. 167 hits over 155 innings pitched, only 151 strikeouts. Not a ton of upside there. He's got 7 strikeout upside. One time this year against the White Sox, he struck out 9 back in May, on May 25th. He should get a ton of run support tonight. So it's going to be about, can he stay in the game, be efficient at 7,300? And I have to tell you, I'm much more, as a tournament player, kind of trying to figure this thing out. Clevenger, he's 11-8. And people will look at, he's the highest priced pitcher, so he must be the best pitcher on the slate. Well, I don't want to pay for Clevenger. I'm going to be sneaky, and I'm going to use Flaherty. Flaherty's been good. Flaherty's got upside. He's cheaper. I can get more bats in there. So, Flaherty's the guy that I think will be probably a little bit more owned than Clevenger. Even though Clevenger does get a matchup against Detroit, it's a much better matchup. Clevenger should be the chalk game option. The chalky cash game option, excuse me. Flaherty should be probably the highest owned in tournaments. Hendricks will follow that up. He'll be the what's left over ownership. And then below that, I can see people using Gibson. And for me, if we're going to talk about the fourth guy that I'm going to use today, I'd much rather go and just be completely reckless and use Anthony Kay and be, because if he does strike out 8 guys like he did against Tampa in his first start, I'm going to own him, and not a lot of people are, especially if we're talking about a single entry tournament. This guy in a single entry tonight could be 1% owned. And at 6,300, I can start stacking up Minnesota and Cleveland bats. Or go 3-3-2 and get some Toronto exposure with him and like a 4-man Toronto stack or a 5-man Toronto stack, which would be 4 bats and him as the pitcher. Get a big bat from Minnesota and a big bat from Cleveland in a single entry tournament. And I guarantee you that you and you alone, or you and I, own a lineup that's built like that with Anthony Kay. So that's pitching, man. It's not exciting. There's not a lot to talk about. Pretty straightforward. I'm not going to use Daniel Norris. I'm not going to use Mike Montgomery. I'm not going to use Gabriel Ynoa. They've all had their teeth kicked in. I'm not going to use Kyle Gibson because for a $1,000 discount, I can use Anthony Kay, and he's got pretty much the same upside. And he's going to be the primary pitcher today, meaning that we've scored a lot of runs and given up a lot of runs in the last couple of days. Our bullpen's pretty taxed. Go get him, kid. And ordinarily, I'd be like, damn, this is going to be a bullpen type game, man. I don't really want anything to do with that situation. I want the bats on the other side of it. But for one, it's a 4-game slate. Where am I going to be different? With Kyle Hendricks, a lot of people are going to think they're smart today and use Kyle Hendricks to be different. So Anthony Kay is like, don't max enter and put him in 50% of your lineups. I'm not saying to do that. I am saying in some single entry tournaments, I would definitely use Anthony Kay in a 5-man Toronto stack or in a 4x4 Minnesota Cleveland stack. The other way to be completely contrarian on the slate is to stack Detroit and Chicago, the Cubs. Or stack the Cubs. If you're not really feeling reckless and want to be completely contrarian and go for that big of an upside play. There is so much downside in that stack, that game stack. But you have to go on the opposite side of things if you're going to try to take something down on a 4-game slate. And stacking Detroit with Chicago against Clevenger and Flaherty is the way to do that. That's the easiest, simplest, most straightforward way of doing it. People own Clevenger. People own Flaherty. If those 2 guys get wrecked, you're holding all the cards. Ranking out the stacks, I think the stacks are pretty straightforward. I mean, does it get much more straightforward than there's 2 top-end pitchers with a bunch of other guys that are 4th and 5th in the rotation? No, it doesn't. But let's rank them out. From an implied run total standpoint, by the way, you can find this on the site. Just go to Game Preview, click Optimizer, go to Game Preview, and you can find all of the implied run totals, starting lineups, when they confirm, projected starting lineups until they confirm, etc. Minnesota at 6.3, Cleveland at 5.9, the Blue Jays at 5.6, Baltimore at 5. Below that, you've got St. Louis at 3.8, the Cubs at 3.8, the Royals at 3.8, and Detroit at 2.7. If you want to be contrarian, stack St. Louis, Chicago, Kansas City, and Detroit. That's where you be contrarian. The chalk will be Minnesota against Montgomery, Cleveland against Norris, Toronto against Yanoa, and Baltimore against K. So, not too much to talk about, a little bit of strategy. There's a very clear-cut way to be chalky. There's a very clear-cut way to be contrarian. Get a little bit of both. Play the single entries tonight. Don't max in or anything. It's just, I'll spend 2 minutes on that, okay, before we get out of here. There's 8 teams on the slate. If you want to hedge and you want to max enter, there's one way to do it. You stack Minnesota with everybody, and then you stack Cleveland with everybody, and then you stack Toronto with everybody, and then you stack Baltimore with everybody, and then you stack St. Louis and the Cubs and the Royals and the Tigers. And the way you do that is you go Minnesota straight down. Then you go Cleveland straight down. Toronto straight down. So what I'm talking about would be Minnesota, Cleveland, Minnesota, Toronto, Minnesota, Baltimore, Minnesota, St. Louis, Minnesota, Chicago, Minnesota, Kansas City, Minnesota, Detroit. 5 lineups of 4x4 stacks or 3x3 stacks or 4x3x1 or however you want to do it. Next team up is Cleveland, Cleveland, Toronto, Cleveland, Baltimore, Cleveland, St. Louis, Cleveland, Chicago, Cleveland, Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit. Then you go to Toronto, Toronto, Baltimore, Toronto, St. Louis, Toronto, Chicago, Toronto, Kansas City, Toronto, Detroit. Next team up is Baltimore. You load up Baltimore, stack them with St. Louis, stack them with Chicago, stack them with Kansas City, stack them with Detroit. And you continue this all the way down until you end up with Kansas City and Detroit. That will give you 150 lineups. And that's how you max enter a 4-game slate and try to smash and hedge and hold half your lineups that are contrarian and half your lineups that are chalk. I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Deep Dive. Until then, be cool, keep it cashing. Peace out.